It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon in the Bennett mansion. But that was before the announcement, before the smile, before everything began to fall apart. And it all started with a single sentence from the man Sophie trusted most in the world. "Sophie, sweetheart, come downstairs. I have something important to tell you." 8-year-old Sophie Bennett sat frozen in her room, still holding the pink conch shell her mother once called her good luck charm. She didn't move right away. Her father rarely called out like that, not in that tone. Since her mom died 2 years ago, he barely raised his voice above a soft murmur, and the word important hadn't existed in their lives for a long time. She placed the shell back on her nightstand, careful not to let it roll, and stepped off her bed. As she walked toward the staircase, something in her chest tightened. Not fear exactly, but not comfort either. She stopped at the top step and peered down into the living room. There he was, Nathan Bennett, her father, a millionaire, a genius, a man who'd built an empire of code and glass. And yet, in that moment, he looked almost boyish. He was pacing near the grand piano, dressed in crisp jeans and a linen shirt, smiling. "A real one. Come here, kiddo," he said, holding out his hand. "I want to tell you something amazing." Sophie walked down slowly, gripping the railing. His excitement filled the air like static. It made her feel small. She sat beside him on the couch, and for a moment, he just looked at her. That smile never left his face. "You remember Victoria, don't you?" Sophie nodded once. Yes, she remembered Victoria Hayes, the woman with the perfect hair and perfect teeth, the one who wore perfume that gave Sophie headaches, the one who smiled with her lips but never with her eyes. "Well," Nathan said, laughing lightly, "I asked her to marry me." Sophie blinked, and she said yes. "We're getting married in 3 months." The words echoed in the cavernous room. She stared at him, at his eyes, his mouth, at the way he reached for her hand, as if this was something they should celebrate together. "Isn't that great?" he asked, searching her face for joy. But Sophie couldn't speak. Her stomach was tight, her hands cold. "You're getting married," she said finally. "Yes," he grinned. "And she's already talking about redecorating the guest room and taking cooking classes with you. I think you two are going to be great friends." Sophie forced a smile, or tried to. Inside, something felt wrong, off like a piano that had been tuned just a little too sharp. She thought of the pictures on the mantel, her mother's smiling face, frozen in time, the dusty piano, the sound of silence that had filled the house since the funeral. And now, suddenly, joy was back. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You've only known her for 6 months." Her father's smile faltered for the first time. "When you're older, you'll understand," he said gently. "Sometimes, when you lose something, and you think happiness is gone forever, it shows up in unexpected ways." He pulled her into a hug. "This is going to be good for us, Sophie. We'll be a family again." She rested her chin on his shoulder, but her eyes stared past him, over his shoulder, at the wall of family photos, the ones Victoria would soon want to change, and all she could think was something isn't right. The Bennett mansion had never been so busy. Just a week after Nathan's announcement, florists, planners, and caterers buzzed through the halls like a coordinated swarm. Victoria wasn't wasting time. She'd taken charge of everything, from the shade of roses in the centerpieces to the guest list for the engagement dinner. Sophie watched it all from the staircase, her small hands gripping the banister. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a hotel someone else had moved into. "There you are." Her father's voice broke her trance. He waved her down from the foyer, smiling like he had since the announcement. "Victoria brought something for you. Something special." Sophie walked down slowly. Victoria stood beside her father, radiant in a soft blue dress, her long chestnut hair flowing over one shoulder like something out of a shampoo commercial. Her smile looked warm, too warm. But Sophie had already learned to look past the surface. "Sophie," Victoria said sweetly, stepping forward, "I thought we could start our new relationship with something meaningful." She opened a small velvet box, revealing a delicate silver bracelet, dainty, sparkling, cold. "May I?" Sophie nodded reluctantly and held out her wrist. The bracelet slid into place like a shackle. Her father beamed. "It's beautiful," Sophie said softly. "Thank you." Victoria smiled again, brushing a strand of hair behind Sophie's ear, with fingers that looked more like claws than comfort. "Your father tells me you're quite the little artist," she said. Maybe you and I could redecorate your room together, make it more suitable for a growing girl." Before Sophie could answer, the doorbell rang. Her father left to greet guests, and Victoria leaned down, her voice dropping an octave. "This is an important day for your father and me," she said, her breath smelling like mint and something metallic. "I'm counting on you to help make a good impression." For just a second, her eyes hardened, ice cold and calculating. Then the mask returned, and she stood tall again, smile locked in place as she turned to greet the guests. Sophie stood frozen. That moment, that glimpse didn't feel like nerves. It didn't feel like nerves, it felt like danger. The guests arrived in waves, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone dressed too nicely, hugging too tightly, and Victoria, she was flawless. She laughed at all the right jokes, asked thoughtful questions, complimented outfits, remembered birthdays. She was perfect, too perfect. Only Aunt Olivia, Sophie's favorite person in the world, seemed less than enchanted. 6 months, Nathan, she whispered as she hugged him. "Really, don't start," Nathan said quietly. "She makes me happy. That's all that matters." Dinner was served on the patio. The table glowed with fairy lights and expensive flatware. Victoria floated from conversation to conversation like she'd lived in the family for years. But Sophie saw the truth. She saw how Victoria's voice turned sharp when the housekeeper made a mistake, how her eyes narrowed when someone mentioned Sophie's mom, how she refilled her wine glass faster than anyone else at the table. Later, in the kitchen, Sophie sat, alone with Aunt Olivia, pushing a piece of strawberry tart around her plate. "How are you feeling about all this, sweetheart?" Olivia asked, her voice low. Sophie traced a circle in the condensation of her water glass. "Dad's happy." "That's not what I asked." Sophie looked up. Olivia's eyes were kind and sharp, the kind of eyes that noticed everything. "She's different," Sophie whispered, "when Dad's not around." Olivia sat up straighter. "Different how?" Before Sophie could answer, Victoria appeared in the doorway, smiling like she'd been born doing it. "There you are. Nathan's looking for you both. He wants to toast the 3 most important women in his life." Her tone was syrup-sweet, but when she placed her hand on Sophie's shoulder, her grip was too tight, controlling Dot as they walked back to the party. Sophie glanced back. Aunt Olivia hadn't moved. Her gaze followed Victoria, narrowed, alert, suspicious now. Later that night, Sophie sat on her bed, bracelet still on her wrist, her mind racing. Something about Victoria was wrong. The way she talked, the way she touched things that didn't belong to her, the way her eyes changed when no one else was watching. She wanted to believe her dad's happiness was real, that maybe, finally, they could feel whole again. But even at 8 years old, Sophie knew something the grown-ups didn't. Sometimes, the worst monsters are the ones who smile the brightest. 3 days had passed since the family dinner, but the knot in Sophie's stomach hadn't loosened. If anything, it had gotten worse. Her dad had left on a business trip that morning, an overnight conference in New York, which meant for the first time since the engagement announcement, Sophie was alone with Victoria. The house was quiet when she came downstairs. Too quiet. Victoria stood in the living room, dressed in elegant casuals, tapping away on her tablet. She didn't look up as Sophie entered. "Your father mentioned you have a piano recital next week," she said, her tone clipped. "We'll need to reschedule it." Sophie stopped mid-step. "But I've been practicing for months. Dad already took the day off. I've arranged an important dinner with potential investors." Victoria cut her off. "Family priorities need to adjust when business opportunities arise." Her eyes finally met Sophie's. They were icy, void of warmth. "But Dad promised." Victoria's expression didn't change. She set down her tablet and walked toward Sophie, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Let me make something clear," she said, her voice dropping. "Your father is a successful man who wasted 2 years drowning in grief. I'm helping him move on, reclaim his place. Your little recitals and school plays are charming, but they're not the priority anymore." Gone was the warm, nurturing woman from the dinner party. In her place stood someone sharp, strategic, and utterly indifferent. "I don't think Dad would agree," Sophie said quietly. Victoria let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your father sees what I want him to see. That's how this works. Men like Nathan are predictable, especially when they're lonely." She walked past the family photos on the mantel, running a finger over the frame that held Sophie's mother's smiling face. "These will have to go," she said with a sigh. Outdated decor. Morbid. Really. Sophie's heart thudded. That's my mum. Your mother is gone, Sophie, Victoria said, setting the frame down with rehearsed care. The sooner you accept that, the easier this transition will be. A long pause, then, in a voice dripping with artificial warmth, I'm not trying to replace her, just creating a new chapter. For all of us. That night, Sophie lay in bed pretending to sleep when the door creaked open. She kept her eyes shut, breathing steady. Victoria stepped inside. She didn't say a word. She walked slowly around the room, opened Sophie's closet, studied her shelves, her books, her art supplies. Then, almost to herself, she murmured, so much wasted space. This could make a proper guest suite after the wedding. When the door finally closed, Sophie buried her face into her pillow. The tears came hard and fast. The next morning, Sophie tried telling her dad everything during their video call. Victoria said, we need to cancel my recital. And she wants to take down all the pictures of Mum. Nathan frowned, but only for a second, sweetheart. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. She mentioned a schedule conflict, but we'll figure it out. And the photos, she only suggested updating a few frames. That's all. But Dad, Sophie, he said gently, change is hard. I know this hasn't been easy, but Victoria's, try and give her a chance, okay? The call ended. Sophie sat frozen at the window seat, clutching her mum's photo in both hands. For the first time, the truth was clear. Her dad couldn't see it. Or worse, he didn't want to. She was on her own. 2 weeks passed, and in those 2 weeks, Victoria's presence grew like a shadow across the mansion. Sophie's recital was quietly moved to a date. Her dad couldn't attend. 2 family photos mysteriously broke during cleaning. Victoria had started taking phone calls in whispers behind closed doors. At school, Sophie's teachers noticed the change. She stopped raising her hand. She didn't finish her lunch. She jumped at sudden noises. You've seemed distracted lately, Mrs. Reynolds said gently one afternoon. My door's always open. Sophie just nodded and packed her things. Today, Victoria was picking her up, and that meant another long, silent drive, with fake smiles and polite questions. But as Sophie stood beneath the school's front awning, waiting in the drizzle, something caught her eye. Across the street, parked halfway down the block, was a sleek black car. And in the driver's seat, unmistakable even through the misty glass, was Victoria. She wasn't alone. A man sat beside her. Leaning close, they were talking, intimately, urgently. Then, Victoria laughed, and without hesitation, she leaned in and kissed him. Sophie's heart dropped into her stomach. Her hands fumbled for her phone. She raised it just in time to snap a blurry photo. 15 minutes later, Victoria's red convertible pulled up. She stepped out, drenched in concern. Sophie, darling, I'm so sorry I'm late. Traffic was dreadful in this weather. Sophie forced a smile. That's okay. I was talking to Mrs. Reynolds about a project. They drove home. Victoria chatted about flower arrangements and seating charts, but Sophie wasn't listening. Her eyes stared out the window, back to where the black car had been, and her mind was racing. That night, after pretending to eat her dinner and nod through Victoria's stories about catering vendors and gown fittings, Sophie went to her room early. She didn't sleep. She waited. When the house grew still, no more footsteps, no more voices, she quietly slipped from under her blanket, crossed to the door, and pressed her ear against it. Silence. Victoria was likely in the master bedroom on another one of her late-night calls. Sophie had overheard snippets in the past, business meetings, she claimed, but Victoria's tone never sounded professional. Tonight, Sophie was done wondering. She needed answers. Carefully, she opened her bedroom door and padded barefoot down the hallway. Her father's study was empty, dark, but the faint glow of the computer monitor still flickered in the shadows. The computer was locked, password protected, but Sophie knew it. Her mother's birthday. Her small fingers tapped the keys, and the desktop lit up. A rush of adrenaline hit her chest. She'd never snooped like this before, but this wasn't about curiosity anymore. This was about protection. She opened the browser and typed in the name, Victoria Hayes. Social media profiles appeared. Glowing articles about charity events, mentions of fashion shows and fundraisers, all polished, all surface. But Sophie kept digging. And then, something odd. A photo in an old tech industry article. It was cropped, fuzzy, but there, In the background, standing beside a man in a sharp suit, was Victoria, or someone who looked exactly like her. Sophie clicked. The man beside her. It wasn't Nathan, it was the man from the black car. Back in her room, Sophie opened her tablet and pulled up the blurry photo she'd taken outside school. Same posture, same jawline, same tie pin. She took a screenshot, saved it under a secret folder titled Operation Truth. Her fingers trembled. Who was this man? And why was Victoria lying about knowing him? 2 days later, her father returned home, cheerful and tired. He greeted Sophie with a big hug and promised to take her to the Science Museum over the weekend. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to scream, "She's cheating on you, she's lying." But he looked so happy, so convinced, so blind, and she knew Victoria would twist it somehow. So Sophie decided to do what detectives do: gather evidence, build a case, be ready. Over the next week, she became a quiet observer, a shadow in her own house. She overheard Victoria whispering in the hallway one night, "Yes, it's filed 50 million, signed yesterday. 6 months after the wedding. It's clean, no suspicion." Sophie froze. 50 million. She didn't know everything about insurance, but she understood enough. That was life insurance. That was about her father. She crept back to her room and jotted every word down in a notebook she now kept under her pillow. The next morning, she faked a stomachache to stay home from school. Her father had already left for work. Victoria was planning to meet a florist downtown, which meant the mansion was hers. She waited by her window until Victoria's car disappeared down the driveway, then sprang into action. The guest room, the one Victoria had claimed as her office, was locked. But Sophie had already learned something useful. The old skeleton key from the library cabinet opened almost every door in the house. Inside the room, everything was too tidy. Notebooks stacked perfectly, laptop docked, nothing out of place, too clean. She opened drawers, flipped through files, mostly invoices, color swatches, sample menus. And then in the closet she found it, a small safe tucked behind an old trunk. "Great," she whispered. A safe. She didn't know the code, but before she left the room, she noticed Victoria's tablet charging on the desk. She hesitated, then picked it up. No password. Victoria didn't think she needed one. Maybe she thought an 8-year-old wouldn't dare. She navigated quickly. Email, calendar, files. Then she saw it, a folder labeled Insurance. Inside was scanned documents, $, 50 million life insurance policy on Nathan Bennett, signed, filed, with Victoria Hayes listed as the sole beneficiary. Sophie's hands shook. She took photos of everything with her own tablet, sent them to her secret email account, then deleted all traces. Just as she was about to leave the room, Miss Sophie Razar, the housekeeper, called from the hall. "Are you awake? I brought you some soup." Panic surged. Sophie slipped quietly into the bathroom that connected to her room, took the long way back, and opened her bedroom door, just in time to see Rosa approaching with a tray. "Thank you," she said breathlessly. "I'm feeling a little better." Later that afternoon, while Victoria was still out, Sophie checked the master bedroom, the last place she wanted to go. But she had to know. Inside Victoria's jewelry box was a hidden compartment, a tiny flash drive, and tucked behind the bed's headboard, a notebook. Inside were names, dates, amounts. Next to her father's name, 5 July, accident. The word accident circled over and over. Sophie took photos of every page. Then the front door creaked. Open. Victoria was home. Early. Footsteps echoed on the staircase. Sophie raced to restore everything exactly as she found it. She darted into the hallway and ran straight into Victoria. "Sophie," she said slowly, her eyes narrowing. "I thought you were resting." "I was just looking for more tissues," Sophie lied, holding her tablet close to her chest. "What's that?" Victoria asked, stepping closer. "Let me see. It's just my games. Playing helps me forget I don't feel good." Victoria reached out, her fingers wrapping gently but firmly around Sophie's wrist. Just then, Rosa's voice floated up the stairs. "Miss Victoria, the florist is here." Victoria's grip loosened. Her expression flickered back to her usual smile. "We'll continue this conversation later," she whispered. "Don't wander again." Back in her room, Sophie locked the door, backed up all the evidence to her email, and deleted everything from her device. Her heart pounded as she typed a message. To Aunt Olivia, subject, Emergency IE, need to talk to you. It's about Dad, please, don't wait. She hit send. Then she stared at her teddy bear. Her mom had given it to her the year before she died. Quietly, Sophie picked it up and opened the small zipper in the back. She slid a printed copy of the insurance policy inside, just in case. Sophie didn't sleep that night, even with her bedroom door locked, her tablet hidden, and her backup plan zipped safely inside her teddy bear. The fear wouldn't leave. She lay awake, eyes wide in the dark, listening to every creak and footstep in the house. Her father was still away on business. Victoria was still just down the hall, and Sophie was still completely alone, except for one fragile thread of hope. Aunt Olivia. Sophie had sent the email hours ago, but there was no reply. Not yet. The next morning, she sat at the breakfast table, barely touching her toast, while Victoria hummed cheerfully and read wedding RSVPs aloud like nothing was wrong. Oh look, the Mickelsons are coming from Chicago, and your father's old college roommate RSVP'd too. We're going to have such a beautiful weekend. Sophie forced a smile and nodded. She didn't speak. She was too busy watching Victoria's hands. She knew those same hands had held a pen to sign the insurance policy, had held that man Tyler, or whoever he really was, in a car behind her school, had typed every detail of a scheme that now had one goal: eliminate Nathan Bennett. That afternoon at school, Mrs. Reynolds pulled Sophie aside again. Her warm, steady voice was the only part of Sophie's day that didn't feel like a lie. You've been quiet, Sophie, not like yourself. Sophie hesitated. Mrs. Reynolds, how do you know if an adult is dangerous? That stopped her teacher cold. Dangerous how? Like, if they're pretending to be someone they're not, and they might hurt someone you love, but no one believes you because you're just a kid. Mrs. Reynolds didn't smile. You tell someone, sweetheart. Even if you don't have proof, you tell someone who will listen. Sophie nodded, her eyes hot with tears. I did. I told my aunt. I just don't know if she answered. She didn't have to wait much longer. That evening, Sophie's tablet buzzed. A message from Aunt Olivia. I got your email. I believe you. I'm coming. Sophie exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. The next afternoon, Sophie pretended to forget a book at school. Rosa was supposed to pick her up, but Sophie had other plans. She doubled back after dismissal and slipped out a side door, texting Olivia to meet her 2 blocks away at a park just outside the neighborhood. When she saw Olivia's silver car pull up to the curb, she ran to it. This is all very cloak and dagger, Olivia said gently, but something tells me this isn't just about wedding nerves. Sophie climbed into the passenger seat and pulled out her tablet. She's not who she says she is, Sophie said in one breath. I saw her with someone else. I think she's lying to Dad. They're planning to kill him. I have proof. Olivia blinked. You what? Sophie showed her everything: the photos of Victoria and the mystery man, screenshots of the insurance policy, notes from the notebook she found behind the bed. At first, Olivia looked skeptical, but the more she read, the more her face changed. She filed this policy already? Olivia asked. Sole beneficiary, 50 million, and she said it out loud. Sophie added, I heard her. She said 6 months after the wedding, they'd stage an accident. Olivia closed the tablet. Her face was pale now. Have you shown this to your father? He won't believe me. He thinks I'm just jealous. Victoria has him completely fooled. A long silence filled the car. Then Olivia turned the key in the ignition. All right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. Back at the mansion, Victoria was already asking questions. Rosa said she didn't see you at school. Pick up. Where were you? I forgot a book, Sophie said flatly. Mrs. Reynolds let me run back and get it. Victoria narrowed her eyes. Next time, make sure Rosa knows where you are. Okay. That night, Olivia called again. I'm hiring someone, she said. A private investigator. Someone I trust. He's ex-law enforcement, sharp, quiet, and thorough. He's going to find out everything we can't. Will he find out who Tyler is? Sophie asked. If he's real, we'll know by the end of the week. The days that followed were slow torture. Victoria's wedding prep went into overdrive. Caterers came and went. Designers dropped off gowns. A team of people showed up just to hang lighting in the rose garden. And still, Sophie waited. Each night, she reviewed her files, checked her backup copies, made sure the envelope was still inside her teddy bear, just in case, and each morning Victoria acted like nothing had changed. I had an idea, she said one day. twirling into Sophie's room uninvited. What if we made matching bracelets for the big day? You and me, a little mother-daughter sparkle. Sophie said nothing. She stared at her, silent and still. Then, on the Thursday before the wedding, Sophie got the message she'd been waiting for. A text from Aunt Olivia. Project deadline moved up. Meeting client tonight. Breakthrough imminent. It wasn't just code. It was confirmation. They had something that night. The house was glowing with pre-rehearsal activity. Guests were arriving for a pre-wedding cocktail hour. The whole estate had been transformed. White roses, gold flatware, champagne flutes clinking beneath string lights. Sophie, dressed in a pale yellow junior bridesmaid dress, stood on the staircase, staring at it all like it wasn't real. "You look lovely," Victoria said from the bottom of the stairs. "Your father will be so proud." Sophie nodded, but her heart wasn't in it. She scanned the room, no sign of Olivia. Not yet, and then her phone buzzed. Outside, garden. "Now come alone." She slipped out through the French doors, down the stone steps, and into the rose garden. Olivia stood in the shadows of the gazebo. Beside her was a tall man with silver hair, wearing a dark blazer and a serious expression. "Sophie," Olivia said, "this is Mr. Callahan. He's the investigator." He held a thick folder in his hands. "Your instincts were right," he said. "Her real name is Vanessa Hill. She's changed identities at least 4 times. Each time, she marries wealthy men, insures them, and they die. Accidents, always, accidents." Sophie's knees went weak. "And the man she's working with?" She asked. "His name is Brandon Cooper, known alias Tyler, her partner, romantic and criminal. He's in every photo, just with different hair, glasses, even facial hair. They've been doing this for a decade." Olivia looked furious, sickened. "We need to tell Nathan," she said. "I've tried," Sophie said. "He won't listen." "Then we're not going to ask." The morning of the wedding arrived like a storm pretending to be sunlight at St. Paul's. Cathedral gleamed beneath the clear blue sky, its grand stone facade wrapped in silk ribbons and white roses. A string quartet played softly at the entrance, as Boston's most polished guests filtered into the pews. Inside a side chamber, Sophie Bennett sat alone, small, still, and wide-eyed in her flower crown and junior bridesmaid dress. She stared at the floor, her fists clenched in her lap. Today was the day her father would marry a killer, unless she stopped it. The events of the last 24 hours raced through her mind like a storm. The photos, the real name, Vanessa Hill, the insurance scam, the staged accidents, the accomplice Brandon Cooper, still pretending to be her wedding planner. And now, her father, cheerful and blind, was minutes away from walking into a trap. Mrs. Reynolds, Sophie's teacher, peeked into the room and smiled gently. "You look beautiful, sweetheart. Have you seen Aunt Olivia?" Sophie whispered. "She's in the vestibule. She brought someone with her. A detective, I think." Sophie's heart thud. Hope. A sliver of it. "Do they believe us?" she asked. "They want more evidence before stopping the ceremony." Mrs. Reynolds replied carefully. "But they're here, and that's something." Then the door swung open, and Victoria entered. She was stunning in a high-neck designer gown, her hair pulled into a soft twist, her veil draped like gossamer. But to Sophie, she looked like a snake in silk. Her bridesmaids fluttered around her, adjusting her train. Victoria waited until they left, then turned to Sophie with a smile so tight it could crack glass. "I know what you and your aunt are doing," she said quietly. "It won't work. We know the truth about you," Sophie said. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. "Your real name, what you and Tyler are planning." Victoria's smile vanished, her eyes sharpening. "Your father won't believe you, not without proof, and I've already made sure you don't have any left." Sophie's heart dropped. "What are you talking about? You think I wouldn't check your tablet or your email?" she hissed. "Everything you collected, it's gone." Sophie's stomach twisted. She had left her tablet charging last night, but then she remembered. "You missed something," she said. Victoria blinked. "What?" "My teddy bear," Sophie said quietly. "The one Mom gave me. There's an envelope inside." Victoria's eyes flared, just for a second. Then she smiled again. "Children," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her veil. "Always so dramatic." The music started. Organ chords echoed through the cathedral as guests turned to face the aisle. Victoria walked ahead, flanked by her bridesmaids. Sophie followed behind, holding a bouquet with trembling hands. At the altar, Her father stood tall in his tuxedo, smiling so wide it nearly broke her heart. He was happy, hopeful, blind, and next to him stood Brandon Cooper, in disguise as the wedding photographer, camera in hand, eyes sharp as razors. Sophie scanned the pews and spotted Aunt Olivia near the back, beside a man in a dark suit. The detective. Olivia gave the slightest nod. This was it. The ceremony began. The priest spoke of love and devotion, the promises of marriage, the sanctity of trust. Sophie's heart pounded harder with every passing line. The world blurred around her. Then came the line she'd been waiting for. If anyone knows why this couple should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silenced at the moment stretched, the detective didn't move. Olivia didn't speak. It had to be her. Sophie stepped forward. Stop! Gasps echoed through the cathedral. Her father turned sharply, startled. Victoria's smile twitched. You can't marry her, Dad, Sophie said, louder this time. She's not who she says she is. Nathan blinked. The crowd murmured. Sophie, he said, confused and embarrassed. What are you doing? Her real name is Vanessa Hill, Sophie said, her voice cracking. She and her boyfriend, the photographer, they're planning to kill you for your life insurance money. Victoria let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. She's clearly upset, she said. Children act out when they feel threatened. Aunt Olivia hired an investigator, Sophie cried. She has the evidence. Mom's teddy bear, check inside it. I hid everything there. All eyes turned to Nathan. All color drained from his face. Get the teddy bear, he said to the planner. Victoria's composure snapped. Just a little. Nathan, this is absurd. We are in front of everyone, you know. Don't let them humiliate us. It'll take a moment, Nathan said firmly. If Sophie's wrong, we continue, but I have to know. A painful silence filled the cathedral as the bear was retrieved. Nathan took it gently, unzipped the back, and pulled out a sealed envelope. He opened it. Inside, photos, documents, copies of the insurance policy, and notes in Victoria's handwriting. He read the first page, then the second. Then he looked up. Victoria, he whispered, voice hollow. What is this? And just like that, her mask shattered. The cathedral was silent. Everyone stared. Nathan Bennett, once smiling, now stood frozen at the altar, the wedding program shaking in his hand. He looked from the papers in front of him, to the woman, beside him, and back again. Victoria, he said softly, tell me this isn't real. But she didn't answer, not with words. Instead, Victoria reached forward, snatched the envelope from his hands, and stepped backward, her movements suddenly sharp and calculated. You stupid child, she hissed, eyes locking on Sophie. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The woman once hailed as a perfect bride, elegant, charitable, flawless, was now standing center stage, her carefully crafted image crumbling by the second. Vanessa Hill, the detective called out, stepping into the aisle. Badge raised. You're under arrest for fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. Victoria's face twisted fury behind her eyes. You people have no idea what you've just ruined. Her voice echoed off the stone walls. No longer soft, no longer charming. Sophie's eyes darted to the back of the room. Tyler, or rather, Brandon Cooper, was still posing as the wedding photographer, but now his body was tense, his hand gripping something inside his coat. Sophie felt it in her chest. He was going to run, or worse, fight. Then Victoria turned. Bolted, she sprinted down the aisle, her heels clacking against the marble, her dress billowing like a white flame. Guests leapt out of the way. Stop her, the detective shouted. Brandon shoved aside an usher and ran for the side exit. In the chaos, Nathan grabbed Sophie and pulled her protectively behind him. Stay with me, he said, his voice shaking. No matter what. Outside, the screech of tires cut through the late morning calm. A black SUV peeled around the corner, their getaway car. Victoria and Brandon dove in, slamming the doors shut just as two officers burst through the side entrance of the church. Too late. The SUV fishtailed and disappeared down the avenue. Back inside, the once perfect wedding was now a crime scene. Champagne flutes had been knocked over. A flower arrangement lay crushed underfoot. Guests whispered furiously, pulling out phones, asking questions Nathan couldn't begin to answer. He stood dazed in front of the altar, staring at the spot where his bride had stood minutes ago. Sophie remained by his side. Aunt Olivia reached them, out of breath, eyes blazing. They'll be caught, she said, trying to sound certain. "Callahan's team is already on it." Nathan shook his head slowly, still in shock. "I was going to marry her," he murmured. "I almost gave her everything." "You gave her nothing," Sophie said gently, "because I stopped you." He turned to her then, really looked at her. "You saved my life." He pulled her into a hug, fierce and trembling. Within the hour, police tape cordoned off the cathedral's side entrance. Guests filed out in stunned silence, whispering into their phones and shaking their heads. Mrs. Reynolds hugged Sophie before she left. "I knew you were brave," she said softly, "but you're something else." Sophie nodded, but the weight of it all hadn't settled yet, because somewhere out there, Victoria and Brandon were still free, and they had nothing left to lose. That night, the Bennett mansion was dark and quiet again. Forensic teams had swept through Victoria's guest room. They collected the safe, the jewelry box with fake IDs, and a hidden burner phone filled with messages between her and Brandon. Nathan sat on the couch, still in his tuxedo shirt. No tie, no jacket, just silence. Sophie sat beside him, her head resting against his arm. They hadn't spoken much since the police left. Not because they didn't want to, but because what could they say? How do you find words for the moment your entire reality was nearly rewritten by a lie? Then finally, Nathan spoke. "I let her into our home." His voice cracked. "Into your life. And I didn't see her for what she was. She fooled everyone." "Dad," Sophie whispered, "even the detective said she was good at it." Nathan looked at her. "But you didn't fall for it. You saw through her." "How?" Sophie hesitated. She never smiled with her eyes. Nathan stared. And then, for the first time in what felt like weeks, he laughed. A real, small, broken laugh. "Your mum used to say that too," he said, "about liars." They sat there for a while, quiet side by side as the storm passed outside, but they both knew something. It wasn't over yet. Not until Victoria Vanessa was behind bars, and she wouldn't go down without a fight. For a few days, it seemed like the worst was over. Victoria and Brandon were gone. The wedding was cancelled. The house was quiet again. But Sophie didn't feel safe. Not really. Because people like Victoria don't run away. They come back. Nathan did his best to return to routine. He called the insurance company, froze all financial accounts Victoria had touched. The police released a statement about an ongoing investigation, and Aunt Olivia filed an emergency protection order. But deep down, Sophie knew it wasn't over. The break-in happened 3 nights later. Sophie woke to a sound she hadn't heard since before her mum died. Glass shattering. At first, she thought it was a dream, the kind that starts with tension and ends with screaming. But then she heard the alarm, a blaring, shrieking siren ripping through the house like a knife through silence. She bolted upright in bed, heart hammering. She leapt off the bed, tore open her door, just as her father's voice rang out from downstairs. "Who's there?" "I'm calling the police." Footsteps heavy, 2 pairs, one running toward the back of the house, one coming up the stairs. Sophie froze. Then she saw her dad racing up toward her, holding a baseball bat. "In my room," he said breathlessly. "Go now." Sophie turned to run, but it was too late. At the top of the staircase, Victoria appeared, hair wild, dress torn, eyes mad with fury. She was holding a kitchen knife. "You ruined everything," she growled. "He was my fresh start, my last chance." Nathan stopped cold, his arm stretched protectively in front of Sophie. "Don't come any closer," he warned. "The police are on their way." Victoria laughed. It was a terrible, fractured sound. "Do you think I care?" she hissed. "You think I'm going back to prison? Not a chance." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. And then, from the back of the hallway, another figure appeared. Brandon. Blood on his shirt, a cut across his cheek, but still standing, still dangerous. "Let's finish this," he growled. "Take the girl. We use her as leverage. Then we disappear." "Over my dead body," Nathan said, tightening his grip on the bat. Brandon lunged. Everything happened at once. Nathan swung the bat, connected hard with Brandon's ribs. Brandon screamed, staggered but didn't fall. Victoria ran at Sophie, knife raised. Sophie ducked behind her door, grabbed the pepper spray Aunt Olivia had hidden in her drawer just 2 days ago, and turned back just as Victoria rushed in. "You don't get to take him from me," she screamed. "No," Sophie whispered. "You don't get to take anything." She sprayed the entire can in Victoria's face. Victoria shrieked, stumbling backward, clawing at her eyes. Nathan grabbed Sophie and pulled her into his arms, just as Brandon barreled down the hallway again. But this time, 3 police officers flooded the stairwell, shouting, hands in the air, on the ground. Now, Brandon tried to run, made it halfway back down the steps before a taser hit his back. He collapsed instantly. Victoria was still screaming. 2 officers tackled her to the floor. It was over. The house was filled with flashing red and blue lights. Paramedics checked Nathan's arm, which had been slashed during the struggle. Sophie sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping water, her face pale and still. Aunt Olivia arrived minutes later, shaking, but safe. I should have stayed, she whispered, hugging Sophie. I should have known she'd come back. It's okay, Sophie said softly. You believed me. That's more than most people did. One of the officers approached Nathan. They had 2 passports. He said, plane tickets, cash IDs. They were trying to flee the country tonight. Where to? Nathan asked. South America, Venezuela. Fake names, but they got greedy, came back for revenge. She wrote it in her journal. She wanted you to suffer. Nathan's jaw tightened. He looked at his daughter. She tried, he said, but she failed. 2 hours later, the house was quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't feel like danger. It felt like peace. Sophie lay curled on the couch, under her favorite blanket, while her father spoke softly with the police outside. She looked at the fireplace now crackling softly, and the family photos above it. Her mother's face smiled down from the center frame, untouched, unreplaced. I did it, Mom, she whispered. I helped keep us safe, Mom. 1 year later, the Bennett mansion looked different now. Not bigger, not flashier, just warmer. Gone were the cold grays and silver finishes Victoria had chosen. In their place were cozy throws, bookshelves full of memories, and sunlight that felt like it belonged there again. And in the center of it all, at the old upright piano in the living room, sat Sophie, now 9, her fingers dancing softly over the keys. She was playing the song her mother used to hum while brushing her hair, the one Sophie hadn't touched since the funeral. Today was the first time she played it again, and this time, she didn't cry. Nathan stepped into the room, a steaming mug of cocoa in his hand. He looked older now, not tired, just changed, a little more serious, a lot more present. You sound like your mum, he said gently. Sophie smiled, not stopping. The music, I remember her playing this when I was sick, she said. She said music helps us heal. Nathan sat beside her on the bench, listening to the final note fade into the air. She was right. So much had changed since the day Sophie stopped the wedding. Victoria and Brandon were now both behind bars, facing multiple charges across several states: fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. The case had made national headlines. Millionaire's daughter stops wedding, exposes fiancé's shocking secret plot. Sophie didn't like seeing her name in articles. She wasn't looking for fame. She was just glad he believed her in the end. Nathan had started therapy, real therapy, and had insisted Sophie do the same. At first, she hated it. But over time, the conversations helped. The nightmares faded. The fear loosened its grip. And more than anything, they started doing something new together. Living. They traveled. Just short trips, weekend hikes, lakeside, cabins, tiny museums that they cooked burned pancakes, laughed over spicy chili. They built memories that didn't include pain or secrets. One crisp Saturday in spring, Sophie and Nathan stood at the local community center. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, and a small sign above the entrance read, "The Sophie Foundation First Annual Safety Workshop for Kids." "This was your idea," Nathan said, beaming with pride. "You helped me build it." Sophie replied, "The foundation's mission was simple: teach kids to speak up, trust their instincts, and protect the people they love." Police officers came, therapists, teachers, even Mrs. Reynolds, who still sent Sophie handwritten notes on her birthday. It wasn't just a charity, it was a promise, from a girl who had been ignored, and decided never again. Later that night, back at home, Sophie opened the small wooden box on her desk. Inside was the pink conch shell, her mother's favorite, the one that started everything. She held it to her ear and smiled. "You were right, Mum," she whispered. "I'm not just strong, I'm brave too." She placed the shell gently beside her bed, where it belonged. Then she climbed under the covers, closed her eyes, and slept soundly for the first time in a very long time.